and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. The US says any terrorist attack on the military drawdown, troops or allies in Afghanistan will be met very forcefully. At a news conference, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said Washington is well aware of Taliban threats. Kirby said it would be imprudent for the US not to take these threats seriously. The US says Russia's decision to expel 10 American diplomats is escalatory and regrettable. A State Department spokesperson said Washington reserves the right to respond to any Russian retaliation. Earlier, Russia told the US diplomats to leave the country after Washington imposed sanctions. China says talks between the US and Japan have gone beyond bilateral relations and harmed third-party interests. In a statement, Chinese embassy in the US said Beijing will firmly safeguard its national sovereignty and security. Earlier, US President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga vowed to work together to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. India has lodged a record spike in coronavirus-related deaths with more than 1,300 fatalities in the past 24 hours. It also reported the highest increase in cases for the fifth straight day with nearly 234,000 new infections. Here in Pakistan, the death toll has surpassed 16,000 after 112 deaths were recorded overnight. Nearly 5,000 people tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours, with the tally crossing 750,000. Globally, the virus has claimed nearly 3 million lives and infected more than 139 million people so far. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. The US says any terrorist attack on the military drawdown, troops or allies in Afghanistan will be met very forcefully. At a news conference, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said Washington is well aware of Taliban threats. Kirby said it would be imprudent for the US not to take these threats seriously. He added that it would also be improper for the Taliban to not take seriously what President Joe Biden has made clear. Kirby said there may be some additional enabling capabilities added to Afghanistan for a short time. He said this will help bring about a safe, orderly and deliberately planned drawdown. The press secretary said the US also plans to remove at least some contractors from Afghanistan. The US says Russia's decision to expel 10 American diplomats is escalatory and regrettable. This comes as Russia told the US diplomats to leave the country after Washington imposed sanctions. A State Department spokesperson said it is not in US interest to get into an escalatory cycle. But the spokesperson said Washington reserves the right to respond to any Russian retaliation. The State Department said US sanctions were proportionate to Russia's harmful activities. Earlier, Moscow also banned 8 high-ranking current and former US officials from entering Russia. Those banned include FBI Director, Director of National Intelligence, and US Attorney General. US President Joe Biden has called Iran's uranium enrichment unhelpful for the ongoing nuclear deal revival talks. In a press briefing, Biden said he is pleased that Iran has continued to agree to engage in discussions on how to move forward. The president said he believes the US should never have gotten out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. He said it is good that Tehran is engaged in talks over what it is needed to allow Washington to return. But he added the US is just not willing to make some concessions. Biden said it is premature to make a judgment on the outcome of the talks. Earlier, an EU representative said Iranian and US envoys will return to their countries for consultations before further talks. The Arab coalition in Yemen says it has intercepted another Houthi drone launched towards the southern Saudi city of Jazan. The coalition vowed to take all necessary measures to protect civilians in line with international law. Pakistan has condemned the attack and reaffirmed support for Riyadh against any threat to its territorial integrity. Meanwhile, a Houthi spokesperson said calls for ceasefire in Yemen are insincere as long as the blockade persists. This comes a day after 96 people died in clashes between coalition forces and the rebels for the strategic Marib region. China says talks between the US and Japan have gone beyond bilateral relations and harmed third-party interests. Earlier, US President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga vowed to work together to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. More in this report. It said Taiwan, Hong Kong and Xinjiang are China's internal affairs and should not be interfered with. Biden met with Suga in his first face-to-face White House summit since taking office. In a joint statement, the two leaders underscored the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The statement read, they encouraged a peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues. Later, addressing a think tank, Japanese Prime Minister called for a stable and constructive relationship with China.
Japan's basic policy on pending issues caused by China is to firmly assert what should be asserted and strongly request China to take specific action. At the same time, we must work to establish a stable and constructive relationship with China and keep in close partnership with the United States and other like-minded nations.
The US and Japan also agreed to invest together in areas such as 5G and chip supply chains. Washington pledged $2.5 billion, while Tokyo $2 billion to strengthen digital competitiveness. India has lodged a record spike in coronavirus-related deaths, with more than 1,300 fatalities in the past 24 hours. It also reported the highest increase in cases for the fifth straight day, with nearly 234,000 new infections. Globally, the virus has claimed nearly 3 million lives and infected more than 139 million people so far. Details in this report. While this week saw a record number of COVID-19 cases in many parts of the world, setbacks to vaccination drive also contributed to government's troubles. Chile says China's Sinovac vaccine, CoronaVac, is 67% effective in the first real-world study of the shot. The U.S. drug regulator has revoked emergency authorization of Eli Lilly's monoclonal antibody treatment when used on its own. Meanwhile, 21 U.S. states recorded at least a 10% rise in daily average positive cases.
In concert with the increase in cases, the 7-day average of emergency department visits, hospital admissions, and hospitalizations are all approximately 5 to 8% higher than they were in the prior 7-day period. And sadly, average daily deaths have increased for the third day in a row.
U.S. pharmaceutical company Moderna says it is struggling to supply promised shots to UK because of issues with increasing production at its European plant. Johnson & Johnson has refuted claims that the design of its COVID-19 vaccine may explain why it has been linked to rare brain blood clots. The World Health Organization says the strain that emerged in India can bring about increased transmissibility.
Having two of these mutations, which have been seen in other variants around the world, are concerning because there's a similarity in these mutations that confer increased transmissibility, for example, and some of these mutations also result in reduced neutralization, which may have an impact on our countermeasures, including the vaccines.
The world's largest vaccine maker in India has asked the U.S. president to lift a ban on exporting raw materials needed to make more shots. In Spain, Madrid's public health chief says the shortage of shots may force the region to close down vaccination centers next week. In Pakistan, the death toll from new coronavirus has crossed the 16,000 mark. This comes after the virus claimed another 112 lives in the past 24 hours. The health ministry said nearly 5,000 people tested positive overnight. The caseload has crossed 750,000, out of which nearly 655,000 people have recovered. It said there are more than 79,000 active cases across the country. The ministry said just over 4,100 patients are in critical condition. Meanwhile, Pakistan's envoy to UN has urged for universal vaccination to overcome the pandemic and its fallout. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi will embark on a 3-day official visit to the UAE today. The Foreign Office says two countries enjoy strong ties rooted in common faith and shared history and values. In a statement, the office said Qureshi will discuss regional and global issues of mutual interest with the UAE leadership. The Foreign Minister will also call on his counterpart, His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. He will hold talks with the UAE's leadership on all areas of bilateral cooperation, including trade and investment. Pakistan's Foreign Office said Qureshi will also meet the Pakistani diaspora and interact with local and international media. Eritrea has publicly acknowledged its presence in Ethiopia's Tigre region for the first time. In a letter to the UN Security Council, Asmara agreed to start withdrawing troops from the area. Asmara's UN envoy Sofia Tesfamariam said the looming grave threat in Tigray has been largely thwarted. Tesfamariam said Ethiopian contingents will simultaneously be redeployed along the international boundary. She said the priority should be the delivery of aid to civilians in Tigray. Tesfamariam said the allegations of rape and other crimes lodged against Eritrean soldiers are outrageous. The envoy added that it is a vicious attack on the culture and history of Eritrea's people. In Australia, a 2-year-old boy was attacked by a dingo on Fraser Island and was airlifted to a nearby hospital. The boy is now in a stable condition at the Bundaberg Hospital. The child suffers superficial injuries to his neck, shoulder, buttocks, and thigh. Rescuers say the boy was holidaying with his family and playing outside when the neighbors heard a commotion. Queensland Ambulance Service says spectators chased the dingo away before attempting to stop the bleeding. The paramedics said the boy was lucky to still be alive after sustaining about a dozen wounds. More news stories coming up after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. A new study on the Tyrannosaurus Rex dinosaurs has revealed astonishing information about one of the most fearsome predators to roam the planet. Details in this report.
A recent study has revealed how lucky humans are for not sharing the planet with the mighty Tyrannosaurus Rex. It says the total number of these dinosaurs to ever exist was about 2.5 billion, while 20,000 of them roamed the Earth at once. The research is based on calculations like body size, sexual maturity, energy needs, and geographic range.
The average population density we estimated was about 1 individual per 40 square miles. So perhaps 2 in the area of Washington, D.C., about 1 in the area of Manhattan, about 1 in the area of the city of San Francisco. But I suspect they were clumpy. They were following herds of prey around. So rather than just being like sentinels, 1 every 40 square miles, they probably moved in groups following prey.
The study put the weight of an average adult T-Rex at 5.2 tons, lifespan at 28 years, and a generation time at 19 years. Moreover, the total generations of the species were estimated to be 125,000, which expanded at a geographical range of roughly 89,000 square miles.
I think it probably is the iconic dinosaur. For dinosaur fans, there are others that they often like. The T-Rex is the iconic dinosaur. It is huge. It's got a huge head and huge teeth. It's really scary. I think we like feeling small, and boy, do you feel small when you're standing underneath a skeleton, as I have outside the museum where I work.
Fossils of over 40 T-Rex individuals have been found since it was first described in 1905. The species met a fiery end when an asteroid slammed into Mexico, exterminating 3/4 of the planet's species.
In Malaysia's city of Putrajaya, a group of farmers is successfully producing the Japanese musk melons after perfecting the cultivation method in hot tropical weather. Details in this report.
For a decade, these 3 Malaysian farmers have been working on the appropriate nutrients and treatment to grow one of the world's most expensive fruits. Musk melons are adept to temperate climates, and growing them in hot tropics had been a challenge. However, after constant experimentation and trials, the farmers at Mono are finally selling their prized luxury fruits of labor. They learned the cultivation process after several trips to Japanese farms and from the method of trial and error.
Every single Japanese melon that you see in our farm is almost like a single art piece. This is one of the most important criteria and most difficult to maintain it. To make sure they have very nice appearance and acting, we have to make sure the nutrition, the watering and the fertilizer have to be very consistent and very precisely.
Certain special treatments are performed during the cultivation of melons. The workers regularly massage the fruits with a soft cloth or glove, which they say enhances the flavor. Classical music is also played for the plants via speakers in the greenhouses, which is believed to stimulate their growth.
So yeah, it's pretty interesting to know that as a Malaysian, we can actually grow Japanese-grade melons in Malaysia itself. So it's quite an interesting and thorough experience where they bring us through the farm visits, where they tell us the germination process and how they control the nutrient for each plant, where only one melon is allowed to grow on one plant. So that's quite an interesting process itself.
For their first official harvest, Mono sold around 200 of the 400 musk melons they grew, each carefully selected by the farm staff. Recently, the farm again auctioned its melons at a price of almost $41 each, which is about a third of the priced musk melons imported from Japan. The top 200 melons have already sold out, mostly online.
Russia's national currency, the ruble, has rebounded after steep losses on fresh sanctions from the US. Washington imposed curbs on Moscow over alleged election interference and malicious cyber activity. The ruble strengthened against the dollar, clawing back losses sustained in the previous session. It pulled well clear of an over 5-month low hit on Thursday. The ruble had tumbled nearly 1%, with JP Morgan forecasting a bigger interest rate hike by the central bank. The sanctions prohibit the U.S. financial institutions from participating in the primary market of Russia's government debt. And in the English Premier League, Harry Kane's brace helped Tottenham Hotspur earn a point after a 2-2 draw to Everton at Goodison Park. The draw leaves the Spurs in 7th place with 50 points, one ahead of Everton at 8. Kane fired the Spurs ahead in the 27th minute, but Gylfi Sigurdsson levelled from the penalty spot. Sigurdsson doubled Everton's lead in the 62nd minute with a clinical finish, but Kane punished a defensive mistake 6 minutes later to earn his side a draw. The England captain now tops the season's Premier League scoring chart with 21 goals. In Formula One, Valtteri Bottas has finished ahead of teammate Lewis Hamilton in the second practice session of Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc crashed his Ferrari at the end of what had been an impressive session, while Red Bull's Max Verstappen suffered a drive shaft failure earlier in the session. AlphaTauri's Pierre Gasly was the third quickest, eclipsing Ferrari's Carlos Sainz. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.